Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our Black Lives Matter webinars that we'll be having all through this week. So glad to be a part of NPM. I'm Dr. Kim Harris, and I am Assistant Professor of African American Thought and Practice at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. But right now, I am sheltering in place with my mother in Philadelphia, where I grew up. Very glad to be here. Now you'll see some, in their boxes, we have Valerie Lee Jeter, who is an NPM board member, and Lene Gray, who has been part of our task force, and M. Roger Holland, also part of our task force. Today, for tonight's session, the first of the ones that we have all week, we have Donna Grimes, who is this Assistant Director of African American Affairs, is that correct?
That's right.
For the USCCB, United States
Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Thank you. You did say it gets hard to say at some point.
Yeah.
We also have Father Stephen Bell. Hopefully he'll be able to come on back in. He's coming from Oakland, California. So I'll introduce him more when he comes back, because I know he's having a few technical difficulties across the many miles. So we're thinking about the pandemic of racism before the pandemic. And just to think about some of the ways that African Americans have felt about racism, we're going to go back a few years to some words that perhaps some of you heard over these past few days, because on July the 5th, 1852, at an Independence Day celebration in Rochester, New York, Frederick Douglass, who had been enslaved, who escaped from slavery and went on to be one of the nation's greatest abolitionists and certainly one of the nation's greatest orators, he was asked to speak on Independence, or on July 5th, so the day after Independence Day, but it was an Independence Day celebration. This is a little bit of what he said. Fellow citizens, pardon me and allow me to ask why I am called upon to speak here today. What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Frederick Douglass goes on to say, fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday and are today, rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning and my mouth and my tongue cleave to the roof of their mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. The words of Frederick Douglass. And I wonder what Frederick Douglass and so many of our African American forebears and ancestors would say today in this time of pandemic, and yet knowing that before the pandemic of COVID-19, we were experiencing and had been since before the time of Frederick Douglass, been experiencing the pandemic of racism. So today, for our Black Lives Matter session, we'll have Donna Grimes. Would you please get us started in thinking about racism, and especially in the ways that USCCB, the bishops, have responded with open wide our hearts.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. You know, I think we could have a continuous conversation with Frederick Douglass. We could pick up on where he left off and continue the dialogue. He would, maybe he would be surprised, but we are still talking about the same problems. We're not enslaved legally, but we are enslaved in a lot of other ways, and we are dealing with racism all the time. all the time. In fact, some of us are getting weary of, uh, of all the conversation about racism. And yet, this is such an important moment for us, a moment in history. I've been at the conference for 20 years. And I worked with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development for 13 and dealt with poverty and Catholic social teaching and got a real good grounding in the church's teachings on social justice. And then I came to the Secretariat for Cultural Diversity in the Church, and the work has continued. It's morphed into something a little different. It's more pastoral than it was at one time, but it's been a very good ride, very interesting ride. And I feel very blessed to be in this position, working with the bishops and working with diocesan leaders from around the country, and particularly on issues that I really care about, that I have a real passion for. And so I thought I would start with just a little brief reflection on the bishop's pastoral letter against racism, Open Wide Our Hearts, the enduring call to love. It was approved almost unanimously by the bishops in November of 2018, and that in itself is a feat. Um, it's not a perfect document, but working with the bishops and working at the conference, I have a sense of how things go. My expectations were not as high, lofty as people in the field. They wanted this to be a penultimate statement to talk about racism, to really deal with it, break it open, and give us a plan going forward. This statement is not that, but it's not very long. It's about 25 pages. It's written, there's scripture there, and it's written in a pastoral tone. And just to bear in mind that the bishops wrote this um, to be pastoral, not to be sociological. They didn't want to be political. They recognized that bad things were happening in the country, and that racism was raising its ugly head in a more overt way these days. So for them, uh, what precipitated the letter, and it took us several years to get going, but what really precipitated the letter was the violence, the marching in Charlottesville in the summer of 2017. It was urgent. And I mean, I came back to the office um, after the weekend, and I mean, it was just a buzz in terms of our management staff, on at the executive level. They were so concerned. We've got to do something. We've got to do something. The bishops want to do something. The president of the conference, what can we do? And so they decided this letter we've been talking about, it's time to write this letter again. But I want to highlight that the bishops have spoken about racism, of course. They've spoken about it in the past, in the 50s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, maybe about every 10 years or so. And it's been 40 years since Brothers and Sisters to Us, which was the last statement specifically on racism from the whole body of bishops. Individual bishops have made their own statements, and sometimes regional bishops will get together and make a statement. But this Charlottesville thing freaked them out, if you don't mind my my vernacular there. They felt they had to really do something. This was urgent. And as I reflected on this, I'm like, this has been urgent for us. It's been urgent for years. We wanted the bishops to speak up when Trayvon Martin was killed. We wanted the bishops to speak up, so more and more. There's so many cases of African American young men, women, and children being killed, and the narrative, we feared for our lives and all, and we just wondered, what are the bishops going to say? Well, they came out with this statement, and although this statement, I'm not going to go into the criticisms of the statement. There are a couple of things I'd like to say about that aspect. One is that the statement is not very clear about who's apologizing for what. They say, well, the church has, members of the church have responsibility, and that's the language they have to use. They can't say they won't say the Catholic Church is a racist institution. For one thing, the church, Christ is the church, and that's where they stay. That Christ is the church, and Christ has done no wrong. But the members of the church and structures of the church have and continue to create a great deal of harm. And so they did hint at that. They mentioned that and said we need to make amends. But you know what I'm saying? It wasn't really as clear as people would like to hear that. The other thing, though, is that their statement doesn't lay out a plan of action, but it does overcome some of the problems that earlier statements, such as Brothers and Sisters to Us, lay out. It does address those by at least giving attention to the pastoral letter, not letting it be sidelined by other statements on the other many issues that they're concerned about, immigration and pro-life. And they allowed this statement to stand on their own, on its own. They created an ad hoc committee against racism, which is a big commitment too, because they don't add committees all the time. But this issue was so important to them that they did that. And so one thing that I see in the letter, and I mean, sometimes we have to dig, and I've been involved with the process, the writing process and the editing and all that kind of stuff. So I know you have to dig deeply, but there are things in there that say, hold us accountable. In a way, read the challenges that are in the pastoral letter. And I invite you all to read it again. We must do this. This message is for all of us. It's not for any of us to think that this message is not for us. And we need to work on this problem. We need to do what we can to work on this problem in all areas that we have. We have many ministerial situations where we can address the issue of racism with our priests, with our seminarians, in our Catholic schools, our Catholic organizations. We have lots of opportunities. And that's the hope that I see in this pastoral letter, is that the bishops have, by approving it and getting it out there and supporting it with resources and traveling around, having folks travel around the country to conduct listening sessions with parishioners in a diocese, to bring together groups to do workshops and reading and study together. These are opportunities for us to continue to focus on racism, to not change the channel as happens so often, not just to stay on this channel and deal with the issues as painful as they may be. We're learning a lot. The bishops are learning a lot. Pastors are learning a lot. And on top of that, the fight is on from the naysayers, so that I'm seeing a real rise in objections to the pastoral letter, or if not the bishop's statement itself, to the attention that's being paid to racism. So urgency, I want to stress that. I wanted to bring out some of the values of the pastoral letter itself, um, that it lays groundwork for us to do the planning and the action, for pastoral musicians to do their part, for catechists to do their part, and all ecclesial ministers to do their part. Most people will say they never hear a sermon on against racism in their parish. Doesn't matter what church they go to. They hardly ever hear anything, hardly if ever hear anything against racism. And so those are some of the things that we need to kind of really foster that, promote that, help people to recognize the importance of speak from the pulpit. If that's where you have authority, speak from there. If you have ministries in your parish, speak from there. Ensure that you're calling forth new leaders. Recognize the diversity that's in your midst. Recognize the challenges and the history in your own diocese, as well as the history, or your parish, as well as the history in the church. And so I think I feel very hopeful that the letter is out there. It addresses some really important things that we need to address, and gives people resources. And when you work with, anybody who works with parishes and dioceses know, they're going to ask, well, give me a template. Do you have a prayer service? I get those kind of calls all the time, and maybe you do too. Do you have a prayer service for this, or do you have do you have resources for that? We want to talk about racism, but we don't know how to get started. And so the conference has our office, of course, the Secretariat for Cultural Diversity in the church has developed resources, and our policy arm too, the Office of Justice, Peace, and Human Development, office I came from, where CCHD is housed, where domestic policy and international policy, uh, um, is articulated, and where educational resources are developed for Catholic schools, for homily hints for priests, and bulletin inserts, and many other things like that. So lesson plans, and there's a lot of support there, and there's more coming all the time. So I'm going to show you a handout that you'll receive. I just pulled together a few of the resources, and I indicated the web pages. Our website is being upgraded, and boy, does it need it. It's being upgraded. Really, it's been very hard to navigate, but we're moving to a new website, and this information is being navigated over there, migrated over there. But can we share the screen and show that handout that you're going to receive? It's just a simple, straightforward one. I wanted to direct you to the page where the resources where racism resources are, we have a combating resource page. We have racism itself. We have educational resources on, and so you can see here. And I just wanted to flag three in particular. The first is the pastoral letter itself. It doesn't cost very much, but if you want to, you can see the PDF there, and you can go to the PDF and use it, uh, especially if you need to distribute large amount of copies to everyone in your parish for maybe a town hall meeting or something like that. You could use that. There's a very brief study guide that was also developed uh, to um, to accompany the pastoral letter, and so that gives some ideas of questions that could be raised, and we're learning. The bishops are learning all along, all as we go for as they go forward with these listening sessions that have been happening now in dioceses around the country, and they only happen where the bishop is willing to have them happen. So as much as, but that doesn't mean that you in your own parish or your own school or organization that you can't use these materials yourself. But if you want that broader reach throughout the whole diocese, the we rely on the bishops to say, bring this to my diocese because we want to take these steps, some concrete steps to addressing racism. And the last of the three that I really want to flag is the action steps for eradicating racism. It's really an invitation for bishops and priests to help them to uh, raise the issue of racism, raise it in their ministerial settings. And it also, but not just pastors and it's not just for pastors and the bishops themselves, because there are some of those steps include uh, catechists. How do you getting catechists involved as they're trying to pass on the faith? How do they include racism and fighting racism in their curricula? There are ideas such as why not meet with the chiefs of police in your area? Bring the pastoral council together with the chiefs of police in the area and have a dialogue, especially uh, if your area has experienced one of these tremendous, terrible, horrible killings. Open the dialogue with them. So there are quite a few things, and they're practical. We think they're practical, and I think you will as well. Of course, there are prayers there, parish resources, lesson plans or lesson starters, lots of things. And so invite you to browse around on those 3 pages, and specifically to look at those 3 resources. The last thing I want to say is, just in closing, that this is the new civil rights movement. It really is. Now, I suspect, because we're all in ministry, that most of us were alive during the last one. But even if you were really little, that was different. There was a different dynamic there. And we're building on the shoulders of those who came before us always. Uh, and the 60s and the 70s, or 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a civil rights movement before that. There was legislation. There was Reconstruction. But we're at a point now where there's an eagerness. I sense it because I talk to people all the time from all parts of the country. There's an eagerness to start looking at racism. People are accepting the idea that white supremacy exists and that white privilege is a thing. And that we have to work together we're working together in multicultural settings, and there are things we know and things we don't know, because of our own backgrounds. But I see an eagerness and a desire, and I think, and I want to just say in closing my piece is that we have to keep the momentum going. We can't buckle under the pressure. I was asked recently to take down an essay that a young adult wrote. At my request, she had attended the Black Lives Matter symposium at Xavier University just about two years ago. And so I asked her, well, what was your impression? And she wrote a lovely piece for the website and for the subcommittee. And in the time it's been posted, not a problem, no problems. Last week, I get calls. You need to take it down because she's supporting Black Lives Matter. Well, that's the name of the symposium, first of all. And they were basically making the argument that the agenda is a Marxist agenda. It's anti-Catholic. And all I can say is no, it's based on Catholic social teaching. It's based on the example of Jesus, who always spoke for the disenfranchised, the vulnerable, the outcast. Jesus would be right there, with with the protesters. And why are you laying on the protesters things that don't belong there? They are, and so, but what we will continue to do, we're putting a new reflection up. We're not taking hers down. We're putting a new reflection up that says yes, the bishops support the movement for Black lives. If you can't handle Black Lives Matter, it's the movement for Black lives. And that seems, for whatever reason, to be more palatable for people. But it is a movement, and it's not going anywhere if we, especially if we don't get scared and retreat and say, oh, we got complaints from donors or, from Catholic organizations with a lot of clout. Even some of our most conservative allies in the pro-life movement. I'll mention Gloria Purvis, who had a show, Morning Glory, on EWTN. And because she said that Black Lives Matter and watching George Floyd was like watching an abortion and you can't stop it, they yanked her off. Okay. And Bishop supported her and all, but that's the environment that we're in. But this too shall pass. And so I say, let's keep the momentum going. Let's be smart about it and keep the momentum going and speak the truth. Just speak the truth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you. So it's amazing, no matter how much you hear and read and everything, there's always more to learn. So I appreciate that in your 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so the resources that that Donna was telling us about, when you go back and look at this breakout session, and you can watch it again, and all, you will also see there are already some resources listed there, but then these ones that Donna has been telling us about will also be listed there. So thank you so much. So, all right, so stay with us, Donna, please. We're also now going to hear from Father Stephen Bell. And Father Stephen Bell is a priest of the Missionary Society of St. Paul, also known as the Paulist Fathers. He's originally from Washington, D.C., and he was ordained in the nation's capital June of 2008. Now, some of you will say, well, I know who he is because you remember him as Associate Director of the Busted Halo Ministries in New York. And he was with them from 2012 to 2014 and engaged in full-time young adult ministry by producing podcasts and videos and articles and features and giving workshops. And these days, Father Stephen is serving as the Associate Director of Newman Hall, Holy Spirit Parish, Catholic Campus Ministry of the University of California, Berkeley. So thank you so much for being here with us, Father Stephen, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Sister Donna, for that wonderful treatise on Open Wide Your Heart and how it can be for us a guidepost for looking at some things very intentionally around this issue, this very wide, very complex issue of racism. Dr. Kim, when you started off with a quote from Frederick Douglass, and I'd like to continue in kind, just in light of trying to put some things into context as we look at this issue. Let me kind of back up a little bit and give my perspective. I come to things with a curiosity of the intersection of theology, sociology, psychology, physiology, and philosophy. All the parts of ourself, how do they intersect to form decision making, relationship fostering? How do we actually engage into something that is very much authentic, and how do we really begin to foster our self-authentic language and ways in which we are with one another and with ourselves? My work overall and many of my assignments has been around reconciliation. So looking at that relationship that we have with God, look at relationship with ourselves, and looking at relationship with others, and also with creation. And so kind of taking a step back and looking at this from a wider context, Frederick Douglass said in his speech what the 4th of July means to the Negro. He said, "The sunlight that shines provides light and healing for some of you, but provides stripes and death for us. And he goes on by saying, and what we need for change is not just a light, but a fire. And it's a fire that I believe has been brewing for decades now. I would say, particularly within the last 20 years, my point of beginning is September 11th. And so September 12th, when we woke up after that horrific moment, we in this country began to know what it was like to be truly powerless and truly fearful. We saw bravery exemplified and demonstrated, but we also began to commoditize fear in a whole new way. And that has created a pernicious side effect for how we negotiate our lives. Instead of making room to embrace the other, we have, by and large, with notable exceptions, but by and large, we have looked at the other with great suspicion. Old ways of building borders and fences and walls have come back as a way of maintaining security, preferred livelihood, a sense of prosperity and progress, and also our own personal desires, which we have now, without any sort of personal discernment, have just put out there as something that we should have, not even really taking a look at its effect on the other, but just saying, simply because I want it, I should have it. And so that grows into this entitlement that has also become part and parcel of how we grow up in this civilization. So we've got all those kinds of things going on. Now we hit we hit a pandemic, which has caused us all to put our normalcy to a halt and grind it to a halt. We can't get what we want when we want it, how we want it. And we're finding ourselves very much separated from one another. And I think that sense of powerlessness that has been added onto this river of growing fear, and in many cases, the secondary the secondary emotion of fear tends to be anger, because I'm so frustrated, I'm so annoyed at all of this, and having all that just bubble up. I think all it needed was a fuse, and enter this heinous tragedy with George Floyd, that became the fuse. And being able to see that in living color at a time when we thought that such things would not be conscionable really began to expose what is going on in our country. It has created a sense of awareness that we haven't seen in a while. And that, in conjunction with this health pandemic, I think has given people the time and the space to look at this from a different perspective, to look at the systemic and the institutional, the personal and the social, the generational and cultural racism that has been part of our country since its colonization. And so to understand that even though we have had great strides in how we have seemingly progressed in our country, namely the election of Barack Obama as president for 2 terms, winning Iowa, okay? These things that that actually said that, oh my goodness, we must have overcome, because I didn't even think that this was on the list of something that could be done. And here it is. But the truth is, the undercurrent and not so undercurrent was still in motion, and got a big push from that moment of what we thought was progress. So now we have a fire that Frederick Douglass talks about. And rather than to kind of push it to its more militant ends, I'd like to propose that what we really do have and could appreciate a bit more is a spectrum of light. Everything from the candlelight of initial awareness initial curiosity, that budding sense of knowledge, all the way to the conflagration that echoes the words of Angela Davis. I will no longer accept the things I cannot change. I will change the things I cannot accept. And so we have that fire that's out there, that conflagration of fire that's out there, and everything in between. And amen for it. Amen for it. Just as long as there is a bit more heat now than there was before this all started, is the opportunity, I believe, for change in some kind of way to begin to happen. And so that's a good thing. I think in terms of the change, we're going to have to be open to what is really needed here. The first I would say is education. There is there's a lot that people don't know about how insidious racism has weaved itself into the normalcy of our society. And so becoming more aware of that through education, through hearing stories, through doing the research that one needs to see how these categoricals of racism have actually been demonstrated and fostered and sanctioned in our world today is a necessary. And if that starts from the beginning, amen. If there's already an intermediate and an advanced course in that, then get in where you fit in. But there also needs to be a self-awareness that there has to be some facility and some instruction for how we go on the inside to see how we ourselves have been complicit to this, because it is such a part of our normalcy that we participate in the promotion of racial systems, sometimes intentionally, many times not so much. And so we have to be able to do that. Now, going on the inside is not something that we're known for. And so I think having that instruction for that introspection is absolutely necessary so that we might be able to not judge, but become aware and to acknowledge that there are things within us that need to be looked at, that need to be changed, that need to be pruned, that need to be, and if they're good, if they're productive, then honed. I think in going forward from here, and Sister Donna talked about that pretty well in terms of having some guidelines. Open wide your heart can provide that, can provide the resources that one needs to look at this from a pastoral perspective, but also exercise it in conjunction with our spirituality, with our values of social justice, with our notions and our understanding of how Jesus would have dealt with this situation, or how he dealt with this situation when he was walking amongst us and dealing with these same sort of things. We have to answer a question in the midst of that, though, and to be able to stop for a moment as we look at all of the drama that is being played out right in front of us, pro and con. I think we have to ask ourselves a very basic question, and that is, how will we be with the other? Because that's going to determine just how far we are willing to go in order to eradicate with responsibility and with purpose this whole sickness of racism that is indeed a sin, a pox amongst upon our house. So answering that question, though, I always say, let's kind of take it apart. And so the we has got to be expanded. We have been well versed in our social and our cultural discourse on how to maintain and manage ourselves in a them versus us dichotomy, where the us have all the answers and the right way to go, and the them need to be coerced many times to our side or manipulated to be discredited for the way that they think and do. And so in order for us to really understand the we-ness that is appropriate for this kind of change, we have to ask ourselves, how much room are we willing to give to allow the us to be part of the group. Understanding that unity is not uniformity, that we all don't do the same things, because that's not how God created us. But to understand the richness of diversity and the cornucopia of personhood, talent, and dignity that we bring to that table of humanity is going to be an education for us in a very, very big way. And not everybody is ready to receive that education, and not everybody is ready to do what it takes to have that education move to an integration of heart and spirit. And so we have to be aware of that. And everyone from the top echelon to the bottom peon is going to fall within that category. No one is exempt, because being part of that table means that we can't just stop at tolerance. Cory Booker said this really beautifully. He said that tolerance is simply when we make space for another to exist. And that's not what we're doing. We're talking about acceptance. We as Christians, and particularly Catholic Christians, and I say that only because of what we preach, we're called to love. And that requires acceptance. That requires looking in the eyes of our brother and sister that is in front of us, whom we have encountered, recognizing the image and likeness of God in which they have been created, to respect and to safeguard their dignity because it is our responsibility. And then affirming and articulating that value that they are in our lives. That's what we are called to do. We don't have much education in how to do that. We speak it quite beautifully. We know how to say it, but do we know how to do it? And I think that's going to really make all the difference. It's going to require sacrifice. The agape love with which God fills us, empowers us, and commands us to share with others is agapeic. It's sacrificial. That means we have to give up something in order that we might receive the riches of another. And many of us are holding on too tight to our own treasures in order to be able to do that. And so that's going to be another challenge that is before us. And also it's about normalizing a new normal, to say what is can no longer be. And so now we have to be something new. So that's what I have to offer to this discussion, just particularly in light of what my sister has brought forward. And I hope that that's helpful. Uh-oh, I think we lost her.
Thank you so much, Father Stephen. I do think that she must have fallen off our platform. I'm sure she'll be right back.
Okay.
I know that we had some other things. Do you all have some more things? I know she had an agenda of what she wanted to talk about. Do you know, Donna, do you have some more things that you can add for us while we're waiting for her to join us again?
Okay.
Perfect.
Go ahead. Oh, Valerie, you had something you wanted to add,
Nope.
Valerie?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. I just think, well, let's see, what would I add? I think I've heard a lot of the criticisms, what people say that the pastoral letter didn't do and doesn't do, and what the bishops should say and what the bishops should do. But that's one finger pointing somewhere and four fingers pointing back at us, three fingers pointing back at us, because we all have something to do, and we all have. And I really like what you said, Father Stephen, about the growth. How far are we willing to grow, to love others, and to say, I'm going to go beyond tolerance. I'm going to go to love and the demands of love, as hard as they may be. We all have an opportunity to be converted in a greater way, in a deeper way. There are those who as we, if you think about the discussions that have been going for the last few years around racism, there's this idea that certain people can't be racist. But I'm at the point now where I don't call anybody a racist. I speak about racist thoughts, racist ideas, racist policies. Those are the things that hurt people. If you don't like me, well, if my feelings are hurt, who cares? But if you are holding down whole groups of people, not allowing them to get educated, to get work, to feel safe in their own skins, as well as in their own homes, you know, that's where it's most difficult. That's where the challenge really is, and we have a lot of opportunities to to see, well, where are we the problem and not the um, and not part of the solution. Where are we that way? Are we hardened in our ideas? Are our hearts hardened to some people? And the wonderful thing about being human is that we can change. You hear stories of people who were white supremacists, Confederates, whatever,
Mm.
and have had an awareness. They're waking up to the wrong ideas that they had, and making changes, getting those ugly tattoos removed. And, so, I mean, there's just a lot that we can do. And I think we're not limited. We're
I
not limited.
Yeah, I love how you say that about not calling or not labeling people, at least constitutionally, as racist. I think that
Mm,
just automatically puts a blockade in front of any
right.
kind
They
of
shut
progress
down.
we can do,
Mm,
because it doesn't make anyone aware of where the error actually lies.
mm,
Uh, Also, I think we have to, all for this whole idea, this crazy, ridiculous idea of love that we are supposed to hold on to and supposed to promote, requires us to do that in deed and in word. And so, one of the things that I ask people or challenge people to do is to refrain from. Now, I understood it as reification, but I've been told recently that that's probably not the word that I want to use now. So I'm just going to say categorizing. Okay,
mhm,
that's when somebody is reduced to a particular behavior
mhm,
that they have, or a particular situation that they find themselves in, and we don't necessarily see the personhood of them,
mhm.
because what we concentrate on is the adjective and not the noun. And
Right.
so person first language has been the great solution that I prescribe for that. So as opposed to saying a racist, for example,
Mhm,
I'd say a person who has mentioned a racist thought, or who has
mhm,
promoted a racist idea, or who
mhm.
patronizes a racist institution,
Exactly.
that sort of thing, so
Right.
that we can at least begin to identify where the problem actually lies.
Mhm,
Number one, if we're going to kind of do this whole movement towards change and make it stick, but more to the point, it does begin to make room for us to recognize the personhood in that and the other. And
mhm,
so we don't dismiss them, we don't discredit them, we don't marginalize them, and we
mhm,
don't reduce them.
mhm.
And I say, if you want an even deeper challenge, because we who are Christian are called to be in kinship with one another, then it's not a person, it's a brother or a sister. And so
Mhm.
call them in kind.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Thank
Hmm.
you so much. Thank you. So
Thank you.
I know we have Valerie, and we have Roger and Lene. I don't know if you all want have questions or want to get into this conversation. Thank you, Valerie. I see you. Yes.
I just wanted to add that, I often, because I teach teenagers, and Father Bell, I have to tell you, I busted Halo. That's where I recognized you from. So, but I teach teenagers, and I often say to them several times, I said, if we really knew what baptism meant, how many of you think you would have gone through with it?
Amen.
Like picking up that mission of Jesus, like the responsibilities are so intense. And that call to love, okay, regardless, like telling a 15-year-old, I don't care whether you like them or not, you have to love them. That means you have to want
Mhm.
the best for them. You have to recognize the Jesus in them. And when I think about when I talk about caring for one another, and I start off with prejudice, which means you prejudge. By human nature, we all prejudge.
Mhm.
It's when you prejudge and then you don't want to hear anything that you move to the ism side. Okay. But we recognize the humanness in all of us, and that prejudging, and how much, like you said, in sacrifice, how much are you willing to risk? Because when you find out, oh, that person isn't bad, they're not bad at all. but you already have something in your mind and everybody knows you that one way. How much are you willing to risk to stand on that truth? You know, and that's all that baptism and Jesus work. So my question is that you can think back when I was a baby and baptized, if I knew what I was being called into this mission, oh my goodness, we might have had to have a conversation. That's all I have to add.
Yeah. And just to think about that, you know, how much are we willing to risk in the systems that we're a part of? How much are we willing to risk when we have had privilege within economic systems, when we've had privilege within educational systems, when we have had privilege in ecclesiastical systems? How much are we willing to risk to walk that baptismal road? How much? Now I see Lene. Yes, was there something that you wanted to say? I see.
Yeah, I appreciate the wonderful thoughts that Donna, Sister Donna, and Father Stephen and Valerie offered, and yourself as well. I think this is a time particularly for us to, and I appreciated the fact that you took away the word of the ism, the racism, because I think particularly when you speak about people who have preconceived ideas about a particular culture, it is important to call to the attention, particularly if they are of the faith. It's not in alignment with what the mission of the church. It's not in alignment. When we have thoughts other than love, tolerance, compassion, kindness, we are not in alignment with what our universal church, our Catholic church, what the mission of Jesus is. So I so appreciate it, because with your comments, I too am a teacher. And it's very easy for a child to have these little thoughts about, people weren't born like this. They are a product of their experience. They are a product of how they were raised. But I do believe firmly in my heart that if Jesus could sit down with the Samaritan woman and let her know she had value, we can look at our brothers and sisters who look at us sometimes and don't see us, who look at us sometimes and don't acknowledge us, who look at us sometimes and don't respect us, and show them a different way, offer them a new experience. So I so appreciate the positive trend that we have, because it's not about the us, them, the negativity. It's all about the reconciliation. What can we do to sit at table with each other? How can we educate our brothers and sisters that really don't know? What do? Well, we educate, and we do it in a kind and loving and Christ-centered manner. So I thank you all. I just wanted to say that, because it's all about reconciliation, about the mission of the church.
Yes. Thank you, Lene. And Roger, I see you.
This has been such a rich gathering, enriching and fulfilling, and I so appreciate what our sister Donna Grimes and Father Stephen Bell have brought to the fore for us to think about and to consider. From Sister Donna, I think and meditate and been mulling over our bishops and how you presented that document, and the image of the shepherd caught me in your sharing, and how the shepherd cares for the sheep, and wanting and needing for our bishops to care about us. Jesus is the good shepherd, and then these are the under shepherds, and I've been for so long wanting the shepherds to say that we matter, and they care, and that we are precious. And I appreciated that you also put into context that all of the onus should not be placed at the bishops, but for each and every one of the body of Christ, of the members of the church, and that we all have a responsibility to care for one another. And for Father Stephen to talk about going beyond tolerance and move towards acceptance. And what I couldn't help but contemplate was to go to the scripture and to think about the 10th chapter of Luke. You know, when this scholar, I had to go back, and the scholar says, what can I do, Jesus, to inherit the kingdom? I want to get in. What must I do? And he says, well, what is it you think? Well, what does the law say? He says, well, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your strength, your soul, your mind. Got to do all of that. And you got to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, yeah, you have spoken rightly. And then it says, well, what does that mean? He says, well, what are you talking about? Well, how do I love my neighbor as yourself? And Jesus goes, let me tell you something. And he breaks open that parable. You know, that you getting the paraphrase. My edition hasn't come out yet, but when he breaks it down and he talks about that parable of the Good Samaritan. And we talked about, Father Steve, you talked about the othering, and that's what that parable gets to, how we have made people the other. And for a moment, I didn't know if I would even be able to talk today, because I'm so hurt and I'm tired of the othering. And it's hard enough when the world others you, but when your church others you too, that pain, the scarring of that has been so, but hearing your words has given me hope and re-encouraged me, and faith that if our church seizes this moment, that we can move beyond tolerance to acceptance. And I'm just so encouraged that this is the moment. This is the moment to be seized for this to happen. And your words today have just encouraged me, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful.
Now, for sure, as I was thinking about that, thank you so much, Roger. I got a wonderful text from Valerie today. She said, you have got to listen to the opening to Bishop Seitz. You've got to. And what did you say? You said he really set the table. And he did indeed. So if you all out there on this webinar, if you haven't listened to it already, there are some advantages to this online format. Go back and listen to his words at the opening, but not only to his words, he also sang. He sang, we shall overcome. And here we are at NPM. So, we've got to be talking about music. And yet when we think about not othering people, how can we learn to sing each other's songs? Now you can take that in many different ways, but how can we learn to sing each other's songs? Sometimes we may sing it with each other. Sometimes we may sing it in other places, but to sing each other's songs. But you've got to hear him singing, we shall overcome. I fell off the sofa. I mean, it really brought me to tears.